And what is your profession or occupation?
I am a clinical psychologist, and I am a professor of psychiatry and psychology at the University of Arizona, and I'm in the psychiatry department there.
Doctor, would you be kind enough to pull a microphone down so it's about at your chin level? That's fine.
Okay.
Good. If you need water or anything, just let us know and we'll bring it up to you.
Okay.
You are a clinical psychologist.
Yes, I am.
And tell us what a clinical psychologist is, please.
A psychologist is a person who studies human behavior and studies the mind. A clinical psychologist is an individual who works with people, does evaluations, treats people, and oftentimes also does research with individuals.
Now, what degrees do you hold in the field of psychology?
I hold a bachelor's degree in psychology, a Master of Science degree in psychology, and a PhD in psychology. Well, it's a Doctor of Philosophy in psychology.
I'm going to go through what is called a curriculum vitae, and that is really an educational story of your life, right?
Yes.
I've got to get them here for me to look at. Doctor, where did you receive your first degree and from what institution after you graduated from high school?
I received my bachelor's degree from Gonzaga University in the state of Washington.
And what kind of an institution is that?
It's a small Jesuit university.
When you graduated from there in what year?
1966.
And subsequent to there, where did you go to school?
To Eastern Washington State College, which also is in the state of Washington.
And what kind of a degree and in what year did you get that degree?
It was a degree in clinical psychology, and that was in 1968.
Subsequent to graduating from that institution in 1968 with your master's in clinical psychology, where did you go then?
Well, then I worked for a period of years in New Jersey for a school system.
As a clinical psychologist?
As a psychologist, right. I was a school psychologist then.
And then what did you do?
And then I returned to get my doctoral degree.
When you say your doctoral degree, you mean a doctor of philosophy?
My PhD, that's correct.
And where did you go to school, and when did you get that degree?
I went to the University of Southern Mississippi, and then in order to get a degree in clinical psychology, there's a requirement that you do an internship, and I did my internship at the University of Mississippi Medical School in the psychiatry department.
What states are you licensed to practice your profession in, please?
I'm licensed in the state of Arizona, in New Jersey, in Tennessee, and I was licensed in New York. However, I have my license on inactive status right now.
Now, starting from the time that you left the school where you got your master's in clinical psychology, will you tell us what professional experience and academic appointments you've had?
Right. After I received my doctorate, I was then employed by the University of Mississippi Medical School in the Department of Psychiatry, and I was employed as a lecturer in the department. I then received an invitation to join the faculty of the University of Tennessee Medical School, where I was an assistant professor in the psychiatry department, and I was there for 3 years. Then the College of Physicians and Surgeons at Columbia University extended an invitation to me to join their faculty. And I was initially an associate professor and then became a full professor at that university. I also ran a clinic at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. Subsequently, I was offered a position at the University of Arizona, and I've been there for the past 13 or 14 months.
Okay. Now, I would like to know what your professional experiences have been other than as in the academic area. In other words, what professional experience have you had? You were teaching assistant at the University of Mississippi.
Oh, yes, I have. I've taught. I have co-directed or directed clinics in the both the victimization area as well as the sex offender and paraphilia area. I've written on this topic, and I've given numerous lectures and talks.
Have you been affiliated with any courts in the 70s, either in Mississippi or elsewhere? as a psychologist consultant?
I did some, I consulted at the Harrison County Family Court in Gulfport, Mississippi, while I was working on my PhD.
What are your major research interests, Dr. Becker?
My major research interests are in the area of sexual disorders, sexual aggression, also the area of victimization, and the area of cognitive behavior therapy.
Would you tell us what cognitive behavior therapy is,
Yes.
please?
It's a form of therapy in which one focuses on the beliefs of an individual and also on their behavior to attempt to bring about change, whether it's a change in thinking or an actual behavioral change.
Have you been, in the course of the years, given any awards for anything relative to your field of studies?
A number of years ago when I was in New York, I received the New York State Mental Health Award for the research that I had done with sex offenders.
Have you been the recipient of any awards by the American Society of Journalists?
Yes, I received an award for the American Society, from the American Society of Journalists and Authors because of some work that I had done on the U.S. Attorney General's Commission on Pornography.
Doctor, I'd like to ask you about committees that you have been involved in, and I would like, even though they're numerous, I think they're important. Would you please read from your vitae those committees that you have served on, and we'll move along then at that.
Sure. At present, I'm on the American Psychological Association's Commission on Violence and Youth. I was a member of the American Psychological Association's Working Group on the Treatment of Child Abuse and Neglect. I serve on the Ethics Committee of the Association for the Treatment of Sexual Abusers. I'm on the Advisory Board for the Annual Review of Sex Research. I co-chaired the Institutional Review Board at the New York State Psychiatric Institute from 1988 to 1990. I was on the Board of Directors of the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children from 1986 to 1990. I was on the Advisory Board for the National Task Force of the Creation of Standards for the Assessment and Treatment of Juvenile Sex Offenders. Did you want me to go on? Or?
Yes, please.
I was on the New York City Task Force Against Sexual Assault. I was a commissioner on the United States Attorney General's Commission on Pornography. I was a member of the American Psychiatric Association Work Group to revise DSM-3 in the area of psychosocial disorders. I was a member of the Criminal and Violent Behavior Review Committee for the National Institutes of Mental Health from 1982 to 1986. I was state chairperson of the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists in the state of Tennessee for 1978. I was on the board of directors of the Spouse Abuse Task Force in the state of Tennessee from 1977 to 1978. I was on the advisory board of the Memphis Comprehensive Rape Crisis Center from 1976 to 1978. I was on the steering committee for human sexuality at the University of Tennessee, the University Patient Participation Committee at the University of Tennessee, and I was on the Department of Psychiatry Research Committee at the University of Tennessee.
Numerous, over the years, were you in any way involved with the receipt of grant supports for any studies that you were interested in your field?
Yes. At present, I have a contract from the Pima County Juvenile Court in...
Pima County is the county in which Tucson is located?
That's correct, yes. To evaluate and to make recommendations regarding treatment of juveniles who have committed sexual offenses. I also have a contract from Adult Probation Department in Pima County to do assessments of adult sexual offenders. A couple of years ago, from 1987 to 1990, I had a grant from the National Institutes of Mental Health in the area of HIV prevention. From 1984 to 1987, I had a grant from the New York State Division of Criminal Justice to evaluate and treat juvenile sex offenders. I also had a training grant from the New York State Office of Mental Health to travel throughout the state and train mental health professionals in the area of sexual abuse. I had a grant from 1981 to 1984 from the National Institutes of Mental Health to treat child molesters or to evaluate the treatment of child molesters.
Now, let me at this juncture interject this. It has been agreed by the parties that part of your vitae, or your vitae, is going to be shown to the jury after, so that we don't, we can move it along a little quicker, and I indicated that to you, but basically you've been a recipient of a lot of awards, a lot of monies from different agencies and state and foundation to assist in the study of clinical psychology as you are doing it, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, I'd like to talk to you, if I could, about your professional associations and your memberships. Would you tell us what they are, please?
Yes, I'm a member of the American Psychological Association. I recently became a member of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. I'm a member of the Association for the Advancement of Behavior Therapy, the International Academy of Sex Research, the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children, the American Board of Sexology, and the Arizona Psychological Association.
Amongst others.
Amongst others.
Okay. Now, have you been on some editorial boards?
Yes.
What are editorial boards?
Okay. There are a number of professional journals out there in our field, and I've been asked by a number of journals to review journal articles to make a decision as to whether or not they warrant publication because they are scientifically rigorous.
And that's a number of boards that you serve on in that capacity.
Yes.
Give us an idea of, for instance, you're the guest reviewer for behavioral therapy, the Journal of Adolescent Psychotherapy. What kind of a thing would you do relative to that?
Well, I would be sent articles or research studies that had been conducted. I would review them, critique them, make a decision as to whether they should be published in a scientific journal or whether they needed to be revised and then resubmitted or whether they should be rejected.
Okay. Now, tell us about your teaching experience, please.
Throughout my career, I have been active in teaching medical students, teaching psychiatric residents, psychology interns, and also lecturing to people within my field, within the field of psychiatry, and also within the field of law.
Now, before you took the stand today, we went through your vitae, pages 5 through 18, relative to professional addresses that you have made, articles and books that you've been involved in, publications, invitational conferences, and journal articles, meaning journals within your field, manuscripts under editorial review, and unpublished manuscripts and book reviews.
That's correct.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, I would like to have Dr. Becker's vitae moved into evidence as an exhibit, and that would be exhibit number 30. That's what you've been reading from, have you not, Doctor?
Yes, it is.
And the only difference between what I am showing you and what you have been reading from is there's been a couple of additions to your vitae, and you have expressed those. For instance, the Pima County Courts
Right.
grant is not in there. Is that right?
Right.
Counsel has seen a copy of Dr. Becker's vitae, and I think if the court will allow me to publish 14 of them for the jurors, I have asked Dr. Becker to specifically go to certain pages and see what things are relevant to her continuing testimony.
Any objection to being received, or Ms. White? Sorry.
No, Your Honor. Actually, I don't have a copy.
Oh, don't you? I'm sorry.
As long as counsel gives me one, I have absolutely no problem, and I knew that
One,
such a
it's
motion
received in evidence, and two, you have no objection to it being published to the jury?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's good.
I asked somebody to pass them, Judge. I hesitate to do that. Oh, here's Frank. Frank.
Years ago, I was going to school for 7 years. My dad was in service, and I went to a middle grade school called Articulated School, which I now have been to Tucson.
We're going to be starting at page 5, Dr. Becker. Okay. Doctor, on page 5, would you tell us what professional addresses you made you feel, or you and I feel, might be of some interest to having the jury take cognizance of?
Well, back in the 70s, I presented a paper on instructional control of components of alcoholic drinking. Basically, what that involved is we were seeing if you could work with individuals who are alcohol dependent and try and teach them another way to drink, whether you would be successful or not.
When you tell us what you're looking at, try and see if you can't put us on what portion
One,
of that
two, three,
page.
4, 5, 6, 7. It's the 8th one down under professional addresses.
Anything else on that professional address page?
Also in the 70s, and this would be the 10th one down, the objective assessment of patterns of sexual arousal in rapists and other sexual aggressives. 2 more down, the last one on the page, what are the treatment needs of rapists?
And that was a paper presented at the 8th Annual Convention of the National Organization for Women.
That's correct.
Next page, please, Doctor.
1, 2, 3. The 4th one down, treatment methods to control the urge to rape. That was presented at the Society of Police and Criminal Psychology. The one after that, a comprehensive behavioral treatment program for sexual aggressive, some preliminary results at the Association for the Advancement of Behavior Therapy. After that, a research program for the treatment of sexual aggressives at the first annual conference on evaluating and treating sexual aggressives. Do you want me to go through all of these, Mr.
I want you to go
Boyle,
through
or-
the ones we marked.
Okay. On page 8,
You're skipping all of page 7, Doctor?
there wasn't anything marked on there?
Okay, good.
Okay. On page 8, the first one, determining the sexual preferences in sexual deviates by monitoring low levels of arousal. And that was a paper presented at the annual meeting of the International Academy of Sex Research. I did not personally present that paper, but helped put it together. My colleague Jean Abel presented it. 4 down, the incidence and types of sexual dysfunctions in sexual assault victims. That was at a meeting of the American Association of Sex Educators. 2, 3, 4 from the bottom. The characteristics of men who molest young children. That was presented at the World Congress of Behavior Therapy. On page 9, 18 years and 652 sex offenders later, research conclusions. That was presented at the Society for Sex Therapy and Research. And about mid-page, treating distortions of beliefs and feelings, the use of disclosure material with offenders. That was presented at the 4th Annual Conference on Abuse and Victimization at Harvard Medical School. 2 from the bottom, offender profiles. That was presented at the National Judicial College.
That's where the judges attend and are in attendance.
Yes, where they go, I believe, to get continuing education.
Okay, continue on.
Page 10, the second one from the bottom, why paraphilic coercive disorder will not go away.
You said from the bottom, you mean from
I'm
the
sorry,
top.
from the top.
Where was that presented?
At the American Psychiatric Association. And again, about mid-page, do some adolescents have paraphilias? And that was presented at the National Conference on Sexual Compulsivity and Addiction. And I think that was all that had been marked.
Okay, now that's on your addresses. Let's go to the part on your invitational conferences. That would be on page 12.
You just want me to read the ones that are checked?
I think the ones that, the jury can see that there's been 5 major ones, but just which one do you want to bring to their attention, if at all?
Okay. The National Institute of Mental Health's Criminal and Violent Behavior conference held on next steps in research on sex offenders, and also the Surgeon General of the United States workshop on violence and public health.
Now, publications differ from what you've already told us because there you are an author, is that right? What's the difference between the publications and the other things you've been telling us about?
Well, the ones that we just went through are addresses. That is, that you go to a conference and either you or your colleagues who you worked with present the results of your research. When you have a publication, that means that you took your research and you submitted it to a journal, and then it underwent peer review. Not a lot of people, but usually 2 or 3 people reviewed the material and made a decision as to whether or not it was worthy of publication.
Tell us which ones of those you'd like to bring to the jury's attention, knowing what we're going to be talking about here today.
Okay. On page number 12, the 5th one, research issues in evaluating and treating exhibitionism. On page 13, behavioral treatment of victims of sexual assault. Actually, that was a chapter in a book, not a journal. 5 from the bottom. Sex offenders, results of assessment and recommendations for treatment. And 2 after that, the sexually abused child.
How about the one right before that?
Sexual dysfunctions and deviations. That was in a book called Diagnostic Interviewing. And then the sexually abused child, which appeared in Modern Legal Psychiatry and Psychology. And then on page 15.
So we're skipping 14.
That's correct.
Okay.
5th from the bottom, differentiating sexual aggressives with penile measures. On page 16, the last one, self-reported sex crimes of non-incarcerated paraphiliacs.
What is that, self-reported sex crimes of non-incarcerated paraphiliacs?
Well, most of the literature prior to us conducting the study that we did was based on sex offenders who were incarcerated. And we were interested, and the federal government was interested, in if you guaranteed confidentiality to sex offenders and then interviewed them, would they be more likely to disclose offenses they had committed across a variety of behavior. So we were given a grant by the federal government, and we were also given a certificate of confidentiality by the federal government. And we interviewed over 500 sexual offenders to see how many offenses they committed relative to how many times they had been arrested or apprehended.
I'm going to get into what your findings were after we get you qualified. Okay. What's the next, anything on the next page?
Page 17, the second one down, multiple paraphilic diagnoses among sex offenders.
Wait, I must be missing it. Which one?
Page 17, the second one, Abel Becker.
Okay, I have that as the first one, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Okay, go ahead, read what you have.
Multiple paraphiliacs among sex offenders, and that appeared in the Bulletin of the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law.
Okay.
And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The sixth one down, it's expert testimony in child sexual abuse litigation, and that was in the Nebraska Law Review.
Page 18, please. You have made some book reviews. You've read books and made book reviews for Contemporary Psychology and the Journal of Sex Education and Therapy, correct?
That's correct.
That's what you do, is you look at what somebody else has written up and you kind of evaluate it for publication.
That's correct.
All right, and you have manuscripts of your own under editorial review. And you also have an unpublished manuscript, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, with that in mind, Your Honor, I am finished going through the vitae, and they can be picked up if you want to do that now, or probably better if we do to stretch. Doctor, as these things are being picked up, I want to start asking you some other questions. I haven't asked for I got more to go on that, Judge.
Oh.
I think I have to ask the questions about how often in court and things of that nature.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Doctor, I'm going to ask you some questions about your experience in the field of psychology, clinical or otherwise. First of all, you have told us that you are a forensic psychologist.
I do work that is in the forensic area, one part of the forensic area, and that is specific to working with victims and working with people who have paraphilias or sexual offenses.
All right, now tell us the difference between a psychologist with a PhD, a clinical psychologist with a PhD, and a forensic psychologist with a PhD, and whether or not one can be all three of those.
Well, a PhD conferred in psychology means that you have mastered certain categories of knowledge, in a sense. If you want to work with people, to assess them and to treat them, then you get extra training, and you usually do an internship in which your work with people is supervised. There are people who work in the broad area of forensic psychology who do a lot of court testimony, who do a lot of evaluations for the court in a variety of areas. For example, competency to stand trial, whether or not a person should be able to become a foster parent, to adopt a child, to make a will, etc. So in the whole area pertinent to the law. It's the interface between law and mental health, basically.
Are all forensic psychologists clinical psychologists?
I would believe that most people who have training in forensics have also had training in clinical psychology, yes.
Where is yours, since you hold yourself out as first and foremost being a clinical psychologist?
That's correct.
How is your overlapping in a forensic psychology?
Because I am asked frequently by courts and probation officers and by attorneys to evaluate people to see if they have mental disorders, whether or not they are amenable to being treated, and in what situation that treatment should occur.
Have you ever testified in court as an expert on the issue of whether or not someone is suffering from a mental disease?
I have.
And how often have you done that?
Probably about 6 or 7 times.
And have you, at each and every time when called upon to testify, been qualified as an expert?
Yes, I have.
Have you ever been rejected as an expert?
No, I have not.
Have you ever been called upon to evaluate or render an opinion to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty or probability as to whether or not a person was mentally responsible for a crime they may or may not, for a crime they have been committed or accused of?
I have not been called upon to do that. I'm not sure why, but I think part of the reason might be that it's very rare, in a sense, that in the area that I work in, that type of case would get to court.
Okay.
Most of the cases involve people who are psychotic or might have a personality disorder.
How many of the cases that you have dealt with over the years had to do with paraphilias? Well, before I ask you that, do you have dealings with people who are called paraphilics?
I evaluate and treat them.
And how many such people have you evaluated and treated over the term of your years as a psychologist?
In terms of the clinics that I have either co-directed or directed, so that means I might not have seen every one of these people. I might have supervised and the case been presented to me. I would say in terms of assessment, anywhere between 1,200 or 1,300 individuals who have committed sexual offenses or who have had paraphilias.
What states have you testified in?
I have testified in Arizona, in New York, and in New Jersey.
I want to ask you whether or not you have informed courts as to the mental condition of a person you are called upon to evaluate.
Yes.
And how many times have you done that?
I do that rather routinely in the course of the contract that I have with the juvenile court. And when I was in New York, most of the referrals that we received were either from the probation department or from the court. So I'd have to say hundreds.
Have you been ever asked to discuss with the court in any evaluation as to how someone's mental condition may affect them as far as their ability to understand what they were doing or to be able to control their conduct?
It's mostly in terms of being able to control their conduct, and the way that that usually is phrased is, can this person remain in the community? Is this person treatable? If I say the person is treatable, where should they be treated? That is, in the community or in a residential facility. So I have to make a determination as to whether they represent a risk to society.
First of all, have you had any interaction with physicians as it relates to your work with paraphilias?
Yes, I train physicians, and frequently physicians make referrals to me to assist in evaluating or in treating their patients.
Based upon your years of experience, are you able to make a decision of whether or not a person suffering from the mental disorder of paraphilia is mentally diseased?
Yes.
And have you been able, in the course of your training and experience as a doctor, PhD in psychology, with all your attending work, to render an opinion as to whether or not a person, because of that mental disease, might or might not be able to either conform their conduct to requirements of law or to appreciate the wrongfulness of their conduct?
Yes.
Are you also able to address yourself to the issue as to how a mental disease of paraphilia can affect a person's capacity to engage in conduct, conforming their conduct, or to appreciate wrongfulness of conduct?
Yes.
This time, Your Honor, I would proffer Dr. Becker as an expert and invite any voir dire at this time.
Ms. White.
I just have a couple of questions. Dr. Becker, is it fair to say, I believe from your previous answers, that this is the first time you're being called upon to render an opinion as to, in a trial, as to a person's criminal responsibility for their conduct?
Yes.
Okay, and secondly, that when Mr. Boyle asked you about the opinions that you've rendered or helped courts with that went to responsibility, you indicated that that was in the area of whether or not you felt the person, or determined, I'm sorry, that the person was treatable and a risk to the community, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Well, you may continue.
Thank you. Dr. Becker, you were retained by me to determine whether or not you could become a witness for the defense in the case of State of Wisconsin versus Jeffrey Dahmer.
That's correct.
In that regard, Doctor, just generally, what did you do upon accepting that initial task?
Well, I met with you, I met with your staff. You sent me what appears to be well over 1,000 pages of material to read. I came on January 2nd and 3rd to the state of Wisconsin and interviewed Mr. Jeffrey Dahmer. I viewed 2 videotapes that he had recommended to me that I view, and when I returned here on Sunday, I met with Mr. Jeffrey Dahmer again.
You rendered an opinion on the questions before this court and jury on or about January the 7th in written form.
I don't remember the exact date, but that was probably pretty close.
Now, when you came to Wisconsin in January 2nd and 3rd, you came into what city?
Into Madison.
And where did you travel to from Madison?
From Madison to the Columbia Correctional Institution where I interviewed Jeffrey.
And one member of my office picked you up and was with you overnight and brought you up there, and then another one stayed with you until you left town.
Yes, and actually on that first day, I had hoped to spend more time there, but there was inclement weather and they had a lockdown, and wound up spending about, I guess, 4.5 hours the first day and about 4 or so hours the second day.
Well, with that in mind, when you left there the second day, did you feel comfortable with the amount of time that you spent with Mr. Dahmer so as to do the task that you and I had agreed that you would attempt to do?
Absolutely.
Now, I would like, Doctor, you have a written report, but you also have your notes typed up, and they're basically very lengthy, are they not?
Yes, they are.
26 pages of notes.
Yes.
Okay, what I'd like to do is to ask you, when you left Arizona and came to Wisconsin, as you've of the 2 days was the time you had to make certain decisions whether or not you could be a witness in this case.
That's correct.
You were furnished with what the requirement of law was for a professional expert opinion to be able to state to a reasonable degree of certainty, professional certainty, whether it be psychiatric or psychological, and you were armed with that information.
That's correct.
I didn't understand the question.
Well, she knew what her job was, is what I'm really saying. In other words, you knew what the standard was before you'd have to make a decision whether you could help us or not.
That's correct.
And did you conclude, after meeting with Mr. Dahmer for the 2 days and having the materials that you had, that you were sufficiently able to render an opinion in this case?
Yes, I was.
And when did you arrive at that opinion, and at what point in time did you arrive at that opinion that you could render such an opinion in this case?
After I had interviewed Mr. Dahmer.
As a result of all of the information that had been given to you, did it include the confession that was taken by the Milwaukee police?
Yes, it did.
After reviewing that plus other materials that you had, and after interviewing Mr. Dahmer, did you come to a point where you could render an opinion to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty or probability as to whether or not Jeffrey Dahmer, on each and every one of the occasions of the 15 murders that he has now pled guilty to, at that time the plea had not been taken. But
I object.
I got to get the question out. I haven't got the question out. Was suffering from a mental disease or defect? That's my question.
Your Honor, my objection is that he phrased it as psychological certainty or probability, and that makes it a multiple question.
I'll withdraw it and just concentrate on the
Rephrase
certainty.
question, Mr.
Thanks.
I misspoke. I said one word too much. At the conclusion of your 2 days, based upon everything else I've asked in the previous question, were you able to arrive at a position where you could render an opinion to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty as to whether or not on each and every one of the homicides in question, Mr. Dahmer was suffering from a mental disease or defect?
Yes.
And what is the opinion that you came to relative to that question?
That he is suffering from a mental disease.
And what is the name of that mental disease?
The name of the mental disease is necrophilia.
As a result, and was that present, that mental disease present on each and every one of the 15 occasions where he committed the homicides?
In my opinion, it was.
As a result of that mental disease, and on each and every one of those 15 instances, were you able to arrive in an opinion to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty as to whether or not Mr. Dahmer lacked substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of law?
Yes, I'm of the opinion that in relation to those 15 homicides that he lacked substantial capacity to conform his behavior.
And was the lack of his capacity to conform his behavior because of his mental disease?
That's my opinion.
And that's to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty?
Yes, it is.
Did you arrive in opinion as to whether or not Mr. Dahmer, as a result of mental disease, did not lack substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty?
Yes, I did.
And what is your opinion?
Mr. Dahmer knew that it was wrong to kill these people.
And the opinions you have just expressed are to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty?
Yes.
And they are consistent with what you've said earlier, that this condition and the effect of it was in place on each and every one of these 15 occasions?
That's my opinion.
Okay, tell us what you and Mr. Dahmer did relative to your trying to determine whether or not you would be able to make an opinion as you have now expressed it when you first came to the Columbia Correctional Institution.
Okay. Mr. Boyle, different mental health professionals have different ways of conducting interviews. In my experience, I try to put the person that I'm interviewing at ease by not starting out with the offenses that they have committed or the disorder that they have, but bringing them back to their early life. Most people are comfortable talking about that, and it can also establish a pattern. So I began by asking Jeffrey where and when he was born, and told him that I wanted to learn about him every year from when he was born up to the present.
And tell us what he said in
Sure.
reference to what you were saying as if you have on your notes.
Okay.
And what
Now,
we're going to do, Doctor, so that everybody understands, as you go along, if I feel it requires some explanation other than what you've given, I will interrupt you. Otherwise, we'll move along quickly.
okay, you don't want me to read all of these 26
I want you to read,
pages?
sure, I want you to read that for sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Mr. Dahmer stated that he was born on May 21st, 1960 in Milwaukee at Children's Hospital. He said that the pregnancy had not been planned, and he doesn't recall whether or not his parents had any preferences as to whether they had wanted a male or female child.
Why is that important?
Because in some cases, if there's a stated preference on the part of the parent, an individual can develop some problems in terms of their gender identity disorder.
It wasn't present here.
That was not present,
Continue
no.
on.
His next memory was when he was 4 years of age and he had a double hernia operation. I asked him about this and about memories, and the reason I asked him that is because there are some people who can undergo traumatic surgeries and they can develop problems relative to that. Jeffrey stated that his memories involved watching a program on TV as he was awaiting the surgery, and that program was called Bewitched. He doesn't remember whether his parents were there before surgery. He remembers they were there post-surgery. And he remembered experiencing terrible pain in his groin area for the first week post-surgery, so much so that he asked his mother whether or not his genitals had been cut off because of the nature of the pain.
Why is that important?
Again, was there trauma, and was there trauma in the genital area? He recalls tremendous pain in the area of his genitals and abdomen.
As a clinical psychologist, is that dispositive of a question, or is that just a matter to be considered in the overall context of reviewing someone who you're reviewing to find out whether or not they're mentally ill or not?
Well, I like to look for patterns, and I'm interested in etiology. So I didn't have to know that piece of information to make the diagnosis that I made, but this is the way I interview.
Why would the aspect of this surgery in the genitalia area, the groin area, be interesting at all?
Well, in relation to the offenses that Jeffrey committed and the fact that he experienced pain there, and I apologize to the family members and also to the jury for some of the language that I'm going to use, and the fact that he slit open the abdomens of the 15 men for this trial that he murdered.
So you don't know what it means, but you think it's worthy of note?
Yes.
Okay, continue on, please.
He recalled experiencing very bad earaches between the ages of 4 and 5. He remembered spending a lot of time in the doctor's office during that period. And he offered that he had a memory of being very frightened during those ages, and when he went to the doctor's office, and he was frightened by the flapping of the white paper that is usually on examining tables. Now, I don't know what relevance that has, other than that was something that Mr. Dahmer offered during the interview.
And what they offer sometimes may have some value later in retrospect.
On, absolutely.
But you're not attributing anything specific as to any of these reported?
No, no.
Okay? Just as they might fit in an overall picture.
It might. Okay.
Continue on, please.
Around the age of 6, he recalled his mother being depressed, and he stated that from the time he was 6 onward, his mom was depressed, moody, withdrawn, and physically ill. Most of this behavior occurred after the birth of Mr. Dahmer's brother, David, and Jeffrey was 6 years of age when his brother was born. Prior to age 6, he remembers his father studying for a PhD degree and his mother working part-time for a phone company. He did not recall his parents having any friends. He did remember that his paternal grandparents would come to the home to visit every week or two.
Why did you make note of such information?
Well, you want to see whether or not in the developmental history of a child as to whether or not the family members socialized, whether there were other family members involved, whether there was any degree of closeness.
Okay, continue on, please.
Jeffrey recalled that age 5, he and some other children broke some windows in houses that were being torn down. The police were notified, and he recalled that his parents were shocked that he had participated in such a venture.
Continue on.
I asked him about the toys that he was most interested in as a child, and he stated that he was interested in Legos, styrofoam building blocks, and a bow and arrow. He didn't recall having any guns. That was a direct question that I asked him.
Why is it important for a clinical psychologist to ask questions relative to interest in toys for a youngster?
Well, there are a number of reasons. One, you want to know whether or not the parents purchased toys for children to play with. So, one, they can talk with other kids about this, and two, they're keeping themselves busy. I also wanted to find out about the nature. I mean, were they violent weapons, for example, or weapon-like toys that he was playing with?
Now, is the absence of toys for a child have any significance?
Not necessarily.
Okay, so it's not one way or the other. Having toys or not having toys doesn't really make any difference other than the kind of toys that the child might be interested in.
That's correct. And that may or may not play a part.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. At age 5, he remembered going to an agricultural research center, which was about a quarter of a mile from his home. He recalls seeing dead mice, and that when he walked into the building, the first floor was filled with mice and rats. He remembers being shocked and frightened. He did not recall having any dreams about this experience, but did tell his parents about it.
Continue on.
Mr. Dahmer recalled having one pretty good friend at age 5. The friend was a black child his age. He also recalled that some of his friends were white. He remembered that they would go to one another's homes. Mr. Dahmer denies any sex play or sexual activity occurring at this age. He did have a memory of a stove fire in his house. He remembered that it was not very bad, but that he had seen some smoke coming out as he was walking back from play. Another memory that he had at age 5 was that of telling a boy to put his hand in a wasp nest. He told the boy that there were ladybugs in there, and he recalled that the boy was stung. Jeffrey was 5 at this time.
And what is the significance of that, if anything?
Well, first of all, knowing that there were wasps there, that he would want the child to experience a degree of injury or hurt. And again, I was trying to find out, during his childhood, had he engaged in any activities that we might consider antisocial, or conduct disordered, or that we might consider sadistic.
So it's important for a clinician to know these kinds of things.
Yes.
Okay, continue on, please.
When asked about the type of discipline his parents used at this age, he reported that he was disciplined verbally, by grounding, and sometimes by spanking. He doesn't recall being physically abused. When asked about his memories of kindergarten, he recalled having difficulty getting his boots on and off. He remembered that the teacher would not help him and that he was frustrated and he cried.
You asked him questions about whether or not he had been physically abused. Why is that important?
Well, because in the histories of some people, but not all, who have sexual disorders, you may find a history of being physically abused or being sexually abused. So that's an important question to ask in cases such as these.
And his answers were negative as to both.
That's correct.
How about his first, do you ask him about his first instances of going to school? Is that a traumatic time in a youngster's life?
Well, again, part of asking that is because, unfortunately, there are some children who are abused in school settings, and I asked it as part of
Okay.
that. Also to see whether he developed friendships.
Continue on, please.
At age 6, his family moved to, I'm not sure of the pronunciation, but I think it's Dolestown, Ohio. His father took a position with...
Go ahead. We're not mentioning the
Any
companies.
names, I know.
Go ahead.
His father took a position with an industry there, and Jeffrey entered the first grade. It was during this period that his brother was born. I asked him whether or not he was prepared for his brother's birth and how he felt about it. He stated that he was happy about it, he was interested and curious, and does not recall being jealous. He recalled that they lived in a rural area and there was no one to play with. To help him, his parents bought him a dog, and he remembered that it was a good-natured dog, and he called his dog Frisky. He remembered feeling depressed at that time, and that the dog cheered him up.
Did he tell you why he remembered being depressed at the time?
I believe, but I can't say this with absolute certainty, that it was related to the move, and that at that point he didn't have any friend that he had available to play with him.
As far as the pregnancy, did you make any other notes about, or do you have any recollection about the interaction of this 6-year-old with his mother, who now is suddenly going to have a baby in the house?
There were a couple of questions that I asked Jeffrey, and the reason I asked him these questions was because some of the material indicating that he listened to heartbeats and also the slitting open of the abdomen. Sometimes when women are pregnant and they have a child, they will ask the child if they'd like to feel the baby kicking or to try and listen. And I asked Jeffrey whether or not, his mom held him on her lap, whether or not she ever placed his hand on her abdomen to try and feel the baby moving around. And I also asked him if he had had any thoughts or fantasies of trying to injure his mother to get rid of the child.
What was his responses to those inquiries?
His response was he recalls his mother holding him. He recalls having his hand on her abdomen. He has absolutely no memories of wanting to injure his mother.
Does he have any memories of trying to listen to the heartbeat?
As I recall, it's not the heartbeat, but he heard his mother's heartbeat. Yeah, it's hard to hear the heartbeat of the
How did he hear his mother's heartbeat?
Well, he was be laying on it. His mom would be holding him.
Okay, and he was 6 years of age.
Yes.
Okay, tell us about we've gotten past the part where now he had a dog and he remembers feeling depressed and the dog would cheer him up. What happened, what was the next thing you and he talked about?
Well, then Jeffrey had a memory right after he had talked about his dog Frisky of a neighborhood dog who was vicious and was a trained attack dog. One day the dog broke his chain and chased Jeffrey. He fell down and the dog nipped him on the buttocks. He remembered feeling thankful that the dog didn't hurt him more seriously because this was a very vicious dog. He also recalled, I asked him at that time, since his brother had been born, what the sleeping arrangements were in the home. He said they had separate rooms. He recalled being bused to school. He would come home from school to his mother, watch TV, and play with his dog. I asked him how things were going in school. He recalls being sent to the principal's office and was spanked on one occasion. He was made to stand in the hall for a couple of hours. He was not able to recall what the infraction was.
Based upon your job as a clinician, you're writing down notes and answers to questions you're putting to Mr. Dahmer, things that he is telling you, in response to your questions or volunteered, and then you're transcribing basically everything he told you with an idea to finding out whether or not they're important data or not.
That's correct.
How about this last business you told us about? Anything significant in that?
Well, you know, in that, again, if he was a conduct disordered youngster, I would have thought there'd be more than just one incident of being called to the principal's office.
So you don't see that?
No.
Okay, continue on.
At age 7, the family moved to Barberton, Ohio, and they lived there until Jeffrey was 8. He recalls making some good neighborhood friends, and also that there was a swamp nearby, and he would go to the swamp and he would collect tadpoles. He remembered taking some to his teacher, and Jeffrey stated that he liked this teacher. However, he was upset when he learned that the teacher had given the tadpoles to a boy in his class who was Jeffrey's best friend at that time. And I asked Jeffrey how he knew the teacher had done this, and he stated that he had been over the friend's house and he had seen his tadpoles in the garage. Jeffrey stated that he took motor oil and poured the motor oil into the container of tadpoles in which they were housed to kill them. He told his friend that he had done this. Jeffrey viewed his teacher as a kind person, but he felt that she had rejected him by giving away the tadpoles.
Why is this significant?
Well, because there's a killing of animals at a very young age. And again, trying to see if somehow a pattern developed early on.
Okay, continue on, please. Are you seeing a pattern developing early on?
Well, I'm concerned at age 7 that he is killing animals.
Go ahead, continue on, please.
He recalls not having, I asked Jeffrey then, did you ever see anybody kill animals? Wondering where he got the idea from. And he did not. He remembered feeling anxious after he did this and thinking if she, meaning the teacher, doesn't want them, then nobody will have them.
In your
the
report,
tadpoles.
you have quotation marks around that.
Yes. When Jeffrey said something directly, I didn't do it in every occasion, but I would frequently put quotes around what he said.
So he indicated, quote, of anxiety, and then his quote was, if she doesn't want them, no one will have them.
That's correct.
They were his words.
Yeah.
Okay, continue on, please.
During this time, he remembered his mother being busy much of the time, taking care of his brother. He also remembered that his mother stopped putting him to bed at this time. That is, Jeffrey would have to go to bed on his own. Apparently, there was a good deal of marital stress during this time, and Jeff remembers his mother crying and his parents having many arguments. Jeff recalls being, at age 7, he was in the 2nd grade, and he had a friend at school with whom he played a game. The boys would pretend to choke one another. Jeffrey reported that this behavior was consensual in that both boys agreed to do it, and both boys agreed not to tell anyone about it. The other boy, however, told the principal, and Jeffrey was spanked. He indicated that the boys would touch one another's throats but would not produce a state of dizziness. He recalled being very angry at the boy because he felt that he had been set up, and he remembered feeling that he wanted to, quote, beat the boy up, end quote, for setting him up.
Did he do that?
He did not.
Okay, did you ask him why he didn't?
I did not.
Okay.
Other memories from age 7 was that Jeffrey's father was working an 8-to-5 job. He would play tennis with Jeffrey. Jeffrey also reported that he participated in Cub Scouts. Jeffrey remembered having a friend from school who lived at the end of a dump. He remembered that there were snakes in the dump, and he recalled getting a snake and putting it in his garage. He had wanted to keep the snake, however, the snake had wrapped itself around the spokes of his bike. When he moved the bike, the snake was killed. He reported that this was not intentional, and he remembered thinking that of all the places for this snake, which he really liked, to wind up, it was unusual that it wound itself on his bike and ended up dying. He remembered developing during his 7th year a bad case of hay fever, and he stated that he was constantly sneezing and had runny eyes and nose. He also recalled at this age that his parents' arguments continued. At age 8, the family moved to what Jeff described as a nice suburb in Bath, Ohio. He was in the 3rd grade at this point in time. He recalled their home being on 1.5-acre wooded lot with a pond. He remembered one level was a ranch house, and he recalled that it was a great place to live. He recalled his father planting many fruit trees and that he fished in the pond with Jeffrey. Mr. Dahmer remembered that they would catch bluegills and bass. He remembered his father showing him how to cut open a fish to clean it. He remembered that the egg sac caught his eye. It was the color of it, bright orange, and from that point on he used egg sacs to catch fish. He recalled this as an isolated incident of his father cutting the fish and did not recall any others.
What is the significance of this that caused you to put it in your report?
I believe that there are two areas of significance. One was the way that Jeffrey related this to me in the interview. Jeffrey, for the most part, in relating material, was pretty monotone and pretty flat. When he talked about cutting the fish open and seeing the inside of the fish, he became somewhat more animated, somewhat more alive, in a sense, knowing what he had done in terms of his victims and cutting them open, and knowing that he appeared to be fascinated by the viscera, by the insides of his victims. I wondered if that early incident of the cutting open and the fascination with the colors was not somehow related to what happened later on.
Fine, thank you. Continue on, please.
He recalled being friends with a boy who lived next door named Eric. They spent their time exploring new property. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to mention names.
Yeah, that's okay, please.
He remembered during his, that should be 8th year instead of 8th life, his mother's mood improved somewhat, but not that much. He appeared a bit reluctant to discuss his mother's depression. That is, I wanted him to talk more about his mom, but he was not willing to do that. He then went on to state at that point in the interview that some newspaper had blamed his mother for his acts and that he didn't feel that this was fair. He indicated to me that neither his mother or his father should be held responsible for his behavior. And he stated, quote, "It's not my dad or mom's fault, it's my fault," end quote.
Were you able to determine his reluctance to discuss anything relative to his mother and what he talked about relative to her depression?
I'm uncertain, and I still to this day do not have a very good appreciation or understanding of Jeffrey's relationship with his mother. In a sense, that's an unknown to me.
Okay, but that isn't because you didn't try to learn it.
No, I just believe that Jeffrey had difficulty talking about that and has a concern that somehow whatever is said, that it's going to be interpreted to mean that his mom or his dad have some degree of culpability, and it was my perception that he's trying to protect them from that.
Because he doesn't believe it's their fault.
Because he does not believe it is their fault, that's correct.
Continue on, please.
Okay. At age 9, he entered the 4th grade. He remembers making a new friend. He remembered that he and his friend were interested in nature and they collected different types of fungus. He also remembered being interested in dinosaurs and went fossil hunting. He remembered his relationship with this boy as being healthy. In terms of school, he stated that he was a C student and at this point in time, and that there were no disciplinary problems. He remembered that his parents' relationship was, quote, fair. I asked him whether or not he did any playing or a lot in the way of interacting with his brother, and he did not have any recollection of that. It was at this age that he recalled becoming interested in collecting moths, and he would mount these moths. He remembered that his father and mother helped him mount the different types of moths that he collected.
Why is that interesting?
Well, again, the interest in animals, I mean, the tadpoles, but I mean, there's no clear relevance.
Sure,
I mean, there are lots of youngsters and adults, for that matter, who collect moths, okay?
But what you're telling us about many different things and how they might coalesce.
Yes.
Okay, continue on, please.
He recalled that except for hay fever, his health was good, and he had trouble recalling what his mother's state of mind was at this point in time. I asked him whether or not he had developed any interest in sex yet at age 9, and he reported that he did not. I asked him if he recalled killing or cutting any animals at this age, and he stated he did not. At age 10, he was in the 5th grade. He recalled that he was still friends with that same schoolmate, and I'll just use the initial D for this person. He recalled inventing a game with spirals and stick figures that he called Infinity Land. If the stick figures would get too close together, they would be annihilated. It was Jeffrey who invented this game, and I asked him how he came to invent that game, and he reported that he, quote, just dreamt it up, end quote. He would play this game with his best little friend, and he also recalled engaging in play acting with this friend. The play acting was based on characters in a book by Alfred Hitchcock that he had read. They would play act the different stories. I asked him whether or not any of the stories involved murder or annihilation of people, and he stated that they did not. He recalled not being lonely during this period, and at school he felt that he was accepted by some of the children, but not by others. He remembered keeping to his own circle of friends.
Doctor, did you ask him why he called it, quote, Infinity Land, quid quote? That's at age 5th grade. At age 10, the word infinity is a pretty heavy concept.
Yeah, it is, Mr. Boyle, and I regret to say that I did not ask him why he termed it Infinity Land.
Thanks.
Okay.
But there was, in this game he played, when the sticks would get together, there was annihilation.
Well, and I found that to be of interest.
What was how did the annihilation, can you describe the game stick things? I don't understand that. What kind?
I didn't go into a whole lot of detail with him, just that there were spirals and sticks, and I don't have a clear concept of how
Okay.
they played. But what was of interest to me was that there was an annihilation part of it.
Go ahead.
Okay. He recalled having a female teacher that he liked because she would read books. And he remembered her reading. I asked Jeffrey if there was a particular book that he enjoyed, and he said that there was a science fiction book called A Warp in Time, and I am not familiar with that book. He also recalled the song Tommy by the group The Who that came out during this time, and he very much liked that song.
Do you have any significance either of those two facts?
The science fiction aspect of it, and quite frankly, I remember the song Tommy, but I don't remember the words or the total
You
concept.
just made note of it.
I just made note of it.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
continue on.
He did not recall having, again, I asked him at this age, do you recall having any sexual interests or engaging in any sexual activity? He did not. And I asked him about killing animals, and he did not have any recollection of that. He recalled that at this age, his parents were getting along pretty good, and that his mom's mood was stable. He remembered that his mom was on a medication and would take a lot of it. Sometimes she would become too groggy. He remembered that sometimes he would return from school and she was sleeping, and it appeared that she might have been sleeping all day.
Any significance in that?
Well, what I was wondering, I don't know that there's significance, but what I was wondering clinically is the fact that he attempted to make some of his victims into zombies and would lay with these people. And I had wondered whether or not Jeffrey saw his mother as being a zombie, and would he lay with her? I subsequently have asked Jeffrey that question, and he reported he did not see her being a zombie, and he would not lay with her.
Okay,
He
good.
did not lay with her.
Continue on.
At age 11, he was in the 6th grade. He continued playing Infinity and recalled that the game was becoming more elaborate, but I asked Jeffrey if he could articulate how it was becoming more elaborate, but he was unable to do that. He and his friend now had a 3-year friendship, and they continued to enjoy this friendship. And at this point, they had bicycles and would ride to one another's homes. He reported that his parents were doing, quote, pretty well. He didn't observe much affection between them, however. He did recall that the family occasionally went on hikes, and he remembered that during this period, his mom was taking medication and she was not always in the best mood. He remembered that his little brother would want to tag along with him like most little brothers did. At age 13, he was in the 7th grade and recalled entering puberty at this age. When asked if he had been prepared for the pubertal changes, he stated that he was prepared in health education and that additionally his parents had spoken with him about this. He did not recall how he felt as he went through puberty. He remembered, however, that the changes that took place in his body were gradual. He does not recall his mood changing at that point in time.
That certainly was pretty normal what he was reporting to you. Go ahead.
At this point, he stated that he, quote, lost touch, end quote, with his best friend. He remembered, however, that he still played with a neighborhood boy. When asked why he lost touch with his best friend, he reported that the boy's mother told his best friend not to spend much time with Jeffrey. The boy's mother was afraid that the boy would develop a homosexual relationship. Jeffrey recalled thinking that this was unusual because he was not sexually attracted to his best friend. He remembered feeling that it was, quote, like getting a slap in the face, end quote. He reported that the relationship was ended abruptly. I asked him what his best friend looked like. He described him as being heavier than Jeffrey, having brown hair, was chubby, and had a light complexion. Jeffrey recalled him as being of Norwegian descent. He remembered that he and this best friend did not speak again until the 9th grade.
Let me ask you a question. When he reported that he was told by his best friend's mother, the boy was told by his mother not to be around Jeffrey because they didn't want a homosexual relationship to evolve. Wasn't that awful young to understand what a homosexual relationship was anyway?
I think that most, Mr. Boyle, I think most youngsters today are familiar around the age of puberty, are familiar with the term homosexual or having a relationship with somebody of the same sex or opposite sex.
At this time in Jeffrey's life, is that the first time that he ever was aware of the concept of homosexuality when his best friend told him that his best friend's mother was concerned?
I did not ask Jeffrey that question.
Continue on, please.
Jeffrey stated that he didn't feel all that lonely even though he couldn't see his best friend because he had another friend and they found things to do around the house. He remembers watching the soap opera Dark Shadows on television, and he also watched Star Trek and Gilligan's Island. At age 13, he recalled having his first wet dream or his first nocturnal emission. He was in the 8th grade. He also began masturbating approximately 1 time a day. I asked Jeffrey at that point what his sexual fantasies were. He reported that he did not recall being attracted to either males or females when he first began to masturbate. I asked him whether he had any female friends, however, and he reported that he did not. He recalled that this period in his life was pretty uneventful. He played the trumpet in the band, he was still moth collecting, and was also playing tennis. When asked if he felt accepted by his peers, he stated that he felt accepted enough by the other kids. He was not using alcohol or drugs at this point in time. He also recalled that his parents were arguing and not getting along very well. Do you want me to continue?
Please.
Okay. At age 14, he entered the 9th grade. It was during this age that he had his first sexual encounter with, and I'll use the initial E, the boy who lived next door. Jeffrey remembered initiating the sexual interaction and that it was consensual in nature, that is, they both agreed to do this, and that it occurred in their fort house. He recalled that they were laying there naked. They kissed and fondled one another. He does not recall if he got an erection. He indicated that after 2 or 3 occurrences, the behavior stopped because they both felt that it would be too dangerous if someone saw them. He does not recall his sexual fantasies at this point in time, that is, at age 14. He remembered that in biology class he dissected a pig, took the head home with him, took the skin off, and kept the skull. He remembers keeping this in his garage. When asked about his parents at this point, he stated that he did not recall anything unusual about their relationship at this point. After school, he continued to watch Dark Shadows and Star Trek. He denied being exposed to any sexually explicit materials at this time.
Do you know that Star Trek is science fiction?
Yes.
And Dark Shadows was what kind of a show? Have you been able to find out?
You know, I was asking people about this, and they didn't say that it was exactly about the occult, but I think somewhat approximating that. But I have never seen that show, and I don't have a real clear picture of what that show involved.
Okay, continue on, please.
At age 15, he was in the 10th grade. He remembered being friends with a boy named G. He recalled being an average student. However, the feedback from the school was that he was an underachiever.
What kind of grades was he telling you he was getting?
Average grades.
C's?
C's.
Okay.
Math was his worst subject, and his father tried to tutor him. He recalled that his father got upset and pushed him to do better in school. His father had a teacher send home assignments so that he could work on them. At this age, Jeffrey recalls masturbating every day. The object of his fantasies were good-looking young guys his own age. He fantasized tan, well-muscled, good-looking faces. He recalled that the hair color and nationality did not matter in his fantasies. Regarding his homosexual interests, he reported that he was comfortable with them. He was curious, however, as to why he was homosexual. He felt, however, that he had to keep it to himself. He did not date while he was in high school, either males or females, and he reported having no sexual partners by age 15.
Is there anything significant about his masturbating with this degree of frequency and/or having had a homosexual experience on a number of occasions that he did at age 14 and starting to fantasize about certain types of people, certain body types of people and faces at this age?
Well, the fact is, you know, if you talk to a lot of 15-year-old boys, and they feel that they can be truthful with you and you're not going to pass a judgment on them, you will hear that they masturbate anywhere from 2 to 3 times a week to every day. What is of interest is that Jeff's sexual erotic pattern is beginning to develop here, and that is he is attracted to males and he is associating that attraction with a behavior, with masturbation, with erection, and with ejaculation.
And with a certain type of fantasy.
Fantasies of males, correct.
Yeah, but I mean, the male fantasy in his fantasy is a certain type of person.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Yes.
A specific type of person, and that is good-looking, tan, nice bodies.
Okay, continue on, please.
He recalled that either at age 14 or 15, he went to visit a friend. He was walking back to his own home when 3 seniors, that is seniors from high school, walked up to him. One walked over and hit him on the back of the neck with a blackjack. He was able to run away from these people. He felt angry and frightened and wanted to retaliate. He reported that this act was unprovoked. He kept the incident to himself and never felt comfortable opening up to anyone. He reported that his neck was sore for several days after this.
What was the significance of that, please?
Well, first of all, that there were males who did something that injured him, and injured him to the point that it lasted for a number of days. I also thought it was rather curious that his fantasies after that point developed to the extent that he wanted to hit somebody. And in terms of his first victim, but not a victim in this case, actually hit a person, and before that had fantasies of hitting people and capturing them.
And the fantasies that he thought about reference the hitchhiker was to hit him
Yes,
in the back of the head.
yes.
And in fact, on the Hicks murder, he hit him in the back of the head with a barbell.
Yes, he did.
Continue on, please.
Okay.
I think you're at age 16.
Right. He was a junior in high school. He recalled bringing home dead dogs and cutting them up. He would cut the abdomen open to see what it looked like inside. He still had his dog Frisky. I wondered whether or not, seeing that he was cutting up these animals, as to whether or not he had ever done anything to injure his own dog, and he said he had not. He reported that he never hurt any live animals. He reported that on one occasion he was going to bleach the bones of a dog and reconstruct it. He wondered what it would be like to see the internal organs. He reported that since they were dead, it didn't matter. He recalled that he cut off the head of one dog and put the head on a stake. He showed his friends this for shock value. He reported that he did not tell his friends that he had been the one to cut the head off.
Now, he's 16 years of age.
Yes.
If you believe his pattern of behavior as a clinical psychologist, if he was coming to you and reporting this at the age of 16, what would you start to think?
I would be just very concerned about this. I would want to have him hospitalized, and I would want to have a very thorough assessment done of him because of the cutting up of animals and the fascination with the viscera of the animals and the fact that he wanted to take the bones and reconstruct the animal.
Continue on, Doctor.
He reported that on, I think I've already read this. Okay. He recalled having a few friends at this point. He also recalls feeling frustrated that he could not experience sex.
Why couldn't he?
That's sex with a partner.
Okay.
He indicated
Wait,
that...
let me ask you this. Sex with a partner, did he limit the partners that he was unhappy that he wasn't having sex with? Was it male or female?
He was interested in males.
Okay.
He indicated that his parents were not getting along well and that his father was sleeping in the den. He also recalled that his mother was hospitalized at this time for 1 month in a mental health unit. He recalled that his father became ill at this time and was hospitalized for several weeks, and that his grandparents came to look after him and his brother. It was at this age that he had his first thought about trying to capture a male to be with him. He reported that he had noticed a man who jogged along a road and he was attracted to him. He did not know how to meet this man except forcibly, so he devised a plan by which he would knock the man unconscious. He reported that he broke a baseball bat in half and waited on the side of the road for the man to come by. On that particular day, the man did not come by. I asked him what he would have done had he captured the man, and he told me that he would have taken him into the woods and laid down with him. It was at this point that Jeffrey's paraphilic fantasies began.
Well, why do you say that?
Because he told me that his fantasies then involved forcefully having complete control over someone, over another person.
But the statement that you made, it was at this point that Mr. Dahmer's paraphilic fantasies began, is your opinion, not what he said to you, correct?
Oh, Jeffrey did not use the word paraphilic fantasy.
So it was your conclusion that now we've got him into paraphilia.
Right. Jeffrey basically said it was at this point that he started having sexual thoughts about knocking somebody out, laying with them, and being sexual with them.
I want you to finish the rest of this paragraph, and then I think we should take a break.
The object of the fantasy would be a nice-looking male.
Excuse me, I think we got a quote right after you said this is when they began. Maybe you did say it. He reported the fantasies involved, and then you have a quote.
Yes, Mr. Boyle, I said it, but I didn't emphasize that it was in quotes.
Please.
Quote, forcefully having complete control over someone. The object of his fantasy would be a nice-looking male, and the physique was particularly important, and Jeffrey underscored that in the interview. He wanted to kiss the man, lay with him, and perhaps engage in oral sex.
Now, I think